showcases to help both spotlight our veterans and educate the lab on who our veterans are and the amazing work they did serving our nation and now serving the laboratory. There will always be an accompanied supported article you can read on Newsline following the showcase. Before we get started, just a reminder to remain on mute if you would please. Feel free to leave questions or leave comments in the chat, and we'll address all questions when the interview is complete. This event will be recorded as well, and we'll be sharing some pictures. So no need to be on camera. If you could please, we need the bandwidth unless you're speaking. That would help. Thank you, everybody. And with that said, I'd like to start by introducing our laboratory's Deputy Director, Linda Bauer, who is a strong advocate in supporting our military and veterans serving throughout our laboratory. And we'll be introducing us to our guest veteran, Jerry Mullins, today. Linda, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you very much, Sean. And just want to say on behalf of myself and Kim and really the entire SMT, the lab is extremely proud to showcase staff members who are currently serving or who have served in the armed forces. And I really appreciate these spotlights, in part because they exemplify the laboratory's commitment to veterans and service members, but principally because it's a chance to meet some extraordinary and inspiring coworkers. And today is no different. Today we have the pleasure of meeting with Jerry Mullins. I'm excited about meeting him. Jerry graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1969 and served 7 years on active duty in naval aviation, flying carrier-based jet aircraft in both the Mediterranean and South China Seas. I mean, carrier-based, as in able to land a jet on those short little runways that are pitching and rolling. So I do hope we get to hear a little bit more about that. It's just fascinating to me. But we're here to talk about Jerry. While continuing to fly in the Navy Reserve, Jerry went on to earn a PhD in political science from the University of Michigan, fellow Big Tenner or Big 12er, Big 14er, whatever we are now. He joined the lab in 1979 and has worked in Z program for most of the last 43 years. He continued to serve in the Naval Reserve after joining the lab, eventually commanding an aircraft squadron at the Alameda Naval Air Station, and concluding his service career as an assistant chief of staff for Carrier Battle Group 3. And if all that wasn't enough, he's also a published author and spent over a year on assignment in the U.S. State Department's Bureau of Political Military Affairs. So I can see him starting to squirm. I think I've probably said enough to make him uncomfortable. So it's with a significant amount of appreciation and admiration that I hand the mic back to Sean, who will moderate today's exchange with Jerry. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, for your unwavering support to our military and veterans serving our laboratory. Thank you so much. I'd like to turn it over to Charles Ball, our Deputy Chief of Staff for the laboratory, who has a couple comments. Charles?
Thanks, Sean. I'm really excited to hear about Jerry's military experiences. It really is extraordinary. By my count, Jerry has been serving our country in one capacity or another for 57 years. That's amazing. And I will want to say something at the end after you hear of his experiences, but for right now, I think that says all that needs to be said. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles, for those words. We appreciate it. So we are going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, Jerry. Thanks again for carving out some valuable time to talk with us today. Jerry, why don't we start by, if you could please, summarize for us what you do in your job today.
Well, I'm in Z program, and we perform analysis on existing and potential WMD threats as part of a team that brings a multidisciplinary approach to the problem. We are able to employ publicly available and classified information in combination with the technical resources of the lab. And the goal is, to avoid surprise, help craft national security policy, and make input to the efforts to research and deploy our own military systems.
Wow, that's a significant role, to say the least. Thank you, Jerry. Jerry, tell us a little bit about your background. Where were you raised?
I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I grew up in Cheltenham Township, about 200 yards outside the city line. I went to Cheltenham High School, where I was sandwiched between Baseball Hall of Famer Reggie Jackson, who was a year older than me, and former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who was 2 years younger than me.
Wow. That's very cool. I watched Reggie play for many years in the late 70s and early 80s actually with the Angels and the A's. So I remember him well. Can you tell us a little bit about your family growing up?
Well, my father was an electrical engineer and my mother was a secretary. I have a sister who's a veterinarian. She's 3 years younger than me. I'd say ambitious, but models of rectitude. Our parents led by example. The neighborhood we grew up in consisted of row house apartments that were arranged in such a way that there were communal areas for playing or socializing. The baby boom was in full swing, and there were dozens of children within a block or so of where I lived. It was a good place to grow up.
Can you share a little bit about your education with us as well, Jerry?
Well, as was mentioned, I went to the Naval Academy, graduated in '69. I did the PhD work at Michigan and graduated 10 years later in '79.
Okay, thank you. Great institutions, a little biased here, of course. Um, so Jerry, when did you join the military?
So I joined the Navy when I became a midshipman at Annapolis in June 30th, 1965. I was 17 years old. Midshipman is a rank in the Navy, so it counts like anything else. The 4 years in Annapolis were a good model for life, intense, frequently unpleasant, but very rewarding and an experience in accelerated maturation. I think I was readier for what came next than I realized.
The academies have a way of doing that, don't they?
Yeah.
So Jerry, share with us, if you would please, what or who influenced you to join the military, please?
Well, I grew up in the 50s watching all the World War II documentaries on TV, and I thought airplanes were the coolest thing ever, and ships about tied with them. I built aircraft and ship models, and I read every book in the library I could find about them. Since the Navy had both ships and airplanes, it was an obvious choice to me regarding where to go after high school.
I see. I see. Can you tell us a little bit about your military career?
Well, after Annapolis, I went through aviation training, receiving my wings as a naval flight officer. I had my vision was 2023 in my left eye, not 2020. So I couldn't qualify for the pilot wings. So I got my wings as a naval flight officer, which meant I did everything else and told the pilot what to do. I made no, that's me as a midshipman. I think I'm not sure I'm related to that guy. Um, I made deployments. I joined Attack Squadron 75, which was based at Oceana, Virginia, which is near Virginia Beach. And I made deployments with that squadron to aboard the aircraft carrier Saratoga to both the Mediterranean and the Western Pacific. For shore duty, I taught Navy ROTC at the University of Michigan. After leaving active duty, I joined the Navy Reserve and I've navigated 1940s vintage C-118 transports for the rest of graduate school. I flew in the A-3D Skywarrior from the Alameda Naval Air Station after coming to the lab. And then I closed out my career in the rank of captain as Assistant Chief of Staff for plans for Carrier Battle Group 3, which was based in Alameda. I remember back in the 80s still, there were nuclear carriers based in home ported in San Francisco Bay and Alameda.
Wow, you covered some ground and some air in your career, to say the least. Thank you, Jerry, for sharing that. Can you share a little bit more about maybe each aircraft? I know I'm a enthusiast. I know a lot of folks on the line are. And which was your favorite and why?
Sure. The Grumman A6A Intruder was my favorite because it was extremely rugged, and I think we can talk more about that later. And the cockpit was laid out in such a way to optimize the teamwork by the two-person crew. That's not to say it was perfect. The aircraft was billed as having an all-digital state-of-the-art weapons system, and I suppose it was state-of-the-art for 1961, but there were lots of vacuum tubes, no integrated circuits, and a computer with a memory that consisted of a cylinder the size of a toilet paper tube that spun at 3,600 RPM. That's okay for land-based operations, but catapult shots off the bow of an aircraft carrier generally left that spinning drum computer dazed and confused, and we never really depended on it. The C-118, which I flew in graduate school, is what was known as a DC-6 in civilian life. And it was fun because I got to live the life of an aviator in World War II. You navigated by the stars and ocean weather patterns. And because I got to go places that the jet transports overflew, I spent quality time in the Azores and Iceland and Panama Canal Zone, even Guantanamo Bay, which I have to say, at least in the late 70s, was a dump. I remember most, what I remember, the trip I remember most, though, was domestic. I was on a path to get my PhD in the summer of 79, and I interviewed for a job here in December 78, thinking of it mostly as a practice interview, because I didn't know anything about this place and Z program before. But I was kind of intrigued by the prospect after the interview. In January, I had a reserve trip. We left Detroit in 18-degree weather in and we spent the night in Minneapolis where it was 18 below. And we took a load of passengers to Alameda after managing to get the engines all started when it was 18 below. Normally on trips that don't go over the ocean, I would just spell a pilot up front, give him more rest. But this time I had a rare chance to get a sun line, that is line of position based on the sun, and a moon line based on the moon, on the same observation, and very few navigators have ever gotten to do that. So think about it for a sec. The only way to do that is to fly through the arc of a solar eclipse, and that's what we were doing. And so it was kind of a hoot. I actually did the math afterwards and got crossing lines on a fix that matched up. Then we landed in Alameda just as the sun was setting, and the palm trees were gently wafting in the wind, and the temperature was about 67 degrees. And as I stood outside the aircraft, I thought, that job at Livermore might just be a pretty good deal. C-1D, flying the C-110 was a great experience. It was disappearing at the time, and it's pretty much gone entirely now from the Earth, where you fly around at 120 knots and navigate by the stars. When I got here, I got to fly the A3D Skywarrior, which split the difference between the other two. It had its first flight in 1953, and it's basically a quarter of a B-52. Same engines, just two of them, with all the aerodynamic and mechanical hassles that come with first-generation jet aircraft. But we had a great mission in the Navy Reserve. We did aerial refueling and pathfinding across oceans in support of not only the reserve air wings, but any other fleet operations that needed it. I actually got more flight time in the A3 than either of the other two planes, and over 50 carrier landings to boot, which took some mental getting used to because the A3 doesn't have ejection seats.
Wow. I could share with the audience, I got the privilege of spending a few hours with Jerry preparing for this interview and learned some amazing facts about each of these aircraft. And as an aviation junkie enthusiast myself, it's amazing how much more I learned from an expert. So thank you, Jerry. Thank you for sharing a little bit about each of those aircraft. Just amazing to hear it from you. What was the highlight of your military career, Jerry?
I think it's really hard to single out one thing. I mean, flying combat missions over North Vietnam was easily the most intense experience of all, but it was a highlight also to see 3 classes of ROTC students I had taught embark on their naval careers. And having command of the A3 Squadron in Alameda was a great honor and sort of the epitome of what I'd signed up to be a naval officer for.
Fantastic. Why don't we shift gears a little bit? And since you brought up Vietnam, if you would please, sir, can you share a bit about how you got to Vietnam?
Sure. My squadron was based in Virginia Beach, and the aircraft carrier was based in Florida. And we had deployed to the Mediterranean for a large portion of 1971, and just finished workups for a repeat in early April '72. A squadron buddy, Al Fisher, and I took an A6 to Kirtland Air Force Base because we could check airplanes out for the weekend, and to visit a pair of sisters he'd grown up with in the same neighborhood up in New Jersey. We had a nice day touring around, and we were getting ready to take them out to dinner when the phone rang, and Al said, "Don't answer it," but she did. And it was the Kirtland-based duty officers telling us our squadron had called to say we had to be in the air at first light. That turned out to be about 5 a.m., so we called back to the squadron and talked to the duty officer. "What's up?" "I can't tell you, it's a secret." "Well, give me a hint." "Okay, the ship's pulling out for the Tonkin Gulf on Tuesday. Don't miss it." Well, guess what? With our heads seriously reoriented, we got back to Oceana, Virginia that next afternoon. Everything was controlled chaos as sailors came back early from leave and packed up everything for transport and into planes that get it down to the Saratoga in Florida. My job at the time was Squadron First Lieutenant, which sounds impressive, but is the opposite. I was responsible for the squadron spaces, which means the cleaning gear, the bedding, the office equipment, everything else you need to run the show. Things like that stay with the base or stay on the ship. And so you check them out and then you check them in when you move from the air station to the ship. So keeping a check on this process was a team of very ancient, crusty civilians who would make the most anal NSA auditor you ever met seem like a drinking buddy. But at this point, there was absolutely nothing they could do to me, and they knew it. And so, you know, you're down 52 sheets, 16 blankets, 2 typewriters, and a floor buffer. Sounds about right. Very well. Fair winds. I never felt so empowered in the Navy. We landed aboard the Saratoga Tuesday morning off the coast of Florida and turned south, rounding the Cape of Good Hope about 2 weeks out. Remember, this is one of the years when the Suez Canal was closed. One observation I had was that an aircraft carrier is a big ship, but in the Southern Ocean, it bounces around like a dinghy in Lake Superior. 2 weeks more across the Indian Ocean and the Java Sea put us in Subic Bay. In the Philippines, a bit of over a week of training and getting some back in the saddle flight time, we crossed the South China Sea and began operating off the coast of Vietnam.
Wow. You ask and you shall receive, right?
Yeah.
Jerry, thank you. Just such authenticity with your stories and your experience. Thank you for sharing that. Can you tell us a bit about how operations were run and what a typical mission was like, Jerry?
Well, the routine for the months to come was a 4 to 6 month period on the line, which means somewhere off the coast of Vietnam, mostly up north, followed by a port call of a week or so. When we were on the line, flight ops would run either from noon to midnight or midnight to noon, so that you were doing both day and night operations on the same time. And since it took a couple hours to get ready for flight operations and a couple of hours to secure, it meant for the air wing it was a 16-hour day, but frankly that's the way every day is for everybody on a U.S. Navy ship at sea. At the midpoint of the line period, we would have what's called a stand down, where we would get a half a day, or if lucky, a half a day off, a day and a half off, as the ship shifts from, let's say, noon to midnight to noon. And it doesn't seem like much, but just one night's sleep with no combat in the morning, when you wake up, gave us a rest that really mattered. And that was understood by the leadership, and that's why those things were done. We had variants of the A3 that included tankers, anti-radiation missile shooters, the guys who shoot homing things that home on enemy radars, and bombers. We would fly 2 missions a day, and normally one of those would be ordnance delivery over the beach, and the other would be somewhat less challenging, such as tanking or shooting an anti-radiation missile from offshore or not too far inland. The bombing missions really fell broadly into 2 categories. One was large daylight strikes called alpha strikes with around 16 planes or sometimes more in a diamond formation supported by dedicated jammer aircraft and missile shooters and fighters doing combat air patrol. The other was single plane A6 night missions flown at low altitude and with minimal external support. While the latter was statistically more hazardous, I much preferred it because I had control over what I was doing. We were given a target, but mission planning, tactics, and execution were all up to me. I liked it that way. I was paired with Bob Graustein, a pilot who was much senior to me, but who had not flown the A6 before this. And we got along fine. He respected my experience and did just what I told him to, which I always valued in a pilot. He was busy as the squadron operations officer, so I did essentially all the flight planning. People have asked me, was it scary? But I think a better term is stressful. A typical night mission involves a very high crew workload. We would fly about 500 feet above the ground. And we're down there because we need to be below the radar tracking capabilities of the surface-to-air missiles, since at night it's almost impossible to dodge them once they've locked on you, because you can't judge how far away from you they are when you make your maneuvers. And we stayed extra low to make it nearly impossible, to make it hard for the radar guided AAA to do it. The stress comes from the fact that we're flying at 500 feet and we're going about 600 feet per second. So think about it, 1 potato, 2 football fields. And it's absolutely pitch black, which that means you have to, sitting on the radar, have to be able to tell from our early 60s radar picture exactly where I am and whether the train is rising in front of me, if I'm in a valley and I'm okay, or what's going on. The pilot has to fly on instruments with great precision, and there's and both of us have to pay attention to the electronic countermeasures input we get about warnings and things like that. We also have to glance outside routinely because lookouts all over the region are primed to shoot a flare up in the air if an airplane goes by. And there's a guy in a tower, a lot of guys in towers, and they're taking bearings, figuring out where you're going to be 3 minutes later or 5 minutes later, and then phoning ahead and try and catch you with timed barrage fire. So you're very, very busy. I never planned a straight shot to the target, but I always put in one dogleg at least going back and forth. But we had to maneuver on top of that to avoid these flare-driven things. So while it was stressful, I think the point is that stress was a physiological requirement for the concentration necessary to do what you had to do.
Wow. Well said. That's a strong definition of stress, I would say, to say the least. Thank you, Jerry, for sharing all that detail with us. Really helps us understand just a glimpse, a little bit of some of those challenges that you were experiencing. You shared with me earlier, Jerry, that you faced some challenges while you're on ship and you had to work with a new crew, for example, mid-deployment. Can you share that experience with us, please?
Sure. Well, in October, I got appendicitis, and after the no frills surgery on the ship, I mean, by no frills, I mean, when they wheeled me back, they said, here, hold your own IV bottle up. I couldn't fly for a couple of weeks, and during the break, replacement aircrew were showing up, and it was decided that, that you don't want a replacement aircrew to fly together. You want them to match up with somebody who's already got experience in the way operations are going over there now. So it was decided that Bob and I would split up. And he got a new bombardier navigator, and Mike Schuster, who had been on the med cruise with me and volunteered to rejoin the squadron now, was coming aboard. And he had no Vietnam experience, but he was a really good guy and a good pilot, and we immediately worked well together. The next couple of months went as the couple of months had before. But in mid-December, we were finally looking forward to being relieved and steaming home. And as we got ready for the first day of operations on what was supposed to be an easy line period, we got news that 300 B-52s were going to Hanoi that night. It was time for another head reorientation. Our assigned mission was to get the North Vietnamese to shoot their SAMs at us rather than the B-52s. I don't think being used as chum is anyone's favorite mission, but the fact is our enemy was astute and experienced, and so after the first couple of hours the first night, they largely held their fire waiting for bigger prey. I have to say it took our senior air war leadership a little longer to realize they were onto us, but we were soon back finding targets and hitting them as before. I think I'll describe the one mission that we were famous for. One night, Mike and I had a target as a truck park south of Haiphong, and that was near the coast and easy to get into, but more challenging to get away from because of the dense anti-air defenses in the area. We hit the target perfectly, and but we were taken under fire as we turned away. When you turn away, they normally lose you, but this time the tracers just kept coming right by the cockpit, so we stayed low and kept turning. We later came to understand that we were being shot at by a Russian-made Zu-23 quad anti-aircraft battery that used a radar. They were just showing up over there. They used a radar our electronic countermeasures wouldn't pick up or jam. So anyway, we're making a turn. We're staying low. I'm thinking the thoughts from the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which is, who are those guys? And when there's a bright flash up and to the left, and I think it was a higher caliber anti-aircraft round blowing up, and we pitched down a little bit into rising terrain, and we cleared the ground, but we didn't clear the trees on the ground. Mike hauled back on the stick, and we, we flew up, but that fraction of a second in the trees, that's like 150 feet of trees.
There was damage, and the refueling probe had been mostly torn off. But we popped up to about 2,000 feet. And the first thing I said to Mike was, I know this is going to be hard, but we got to get back down below 1,000 feet because radars are locking on us from all over the place. And he said, you know what happened? I said, yeah, we hit the ground, but not too hard. So let's just work it down. And he did. And I figured out the best heading to get out of there, and we steered for the Gulf. As we did that, the cockpit filled with smoke, which I have to tell you is quite disquieting because there's no way to put out I'm not going to put a fire out on the plane. I pulled back my mask, and it smelled like a campfire, ready for making s'mores. Clearly, vegetation had gone into the engines where it caught fire in the compressor stage. And in the final compressor stage, they bleed off a little of that, cool it, and use it to pressurize the cockpit and air condition the electronics. And so, I told Mike not to worry. It was just wood smoke. He vented the cockpit pressure, and it all cleared up. Another aircraft joined us over the water and reported that the drop tank we carried on centerline was torn in half with only the top attached to the plane. And there were lots of holes from flak and trees all around the bottom. Fuel and hydraulic fluid were leaking out of both wings, and the controls were binding a little bit laterally. But it was still flying, so we headed back to the ship. They cleared the deck for us because we couldn't lower the flaps and slats. And those are the things at the front and back of the plane that increase the camber of the wings so you can fly slower. And but we couldn't put them down because there was so many pieces of wood in the front of the airplane that it would have jammed them. That meant we had to land faster than the nominal limit. And while the air operations people were debating the issue, the captain just said, take them. He'd been a fighter pilot in the Pacific in World War II, and he could make a decision. We snagged the two-wire and called it a night. The aircraft was parked on the hangar deck and used for spare parts for the rest of the cruise before it was craned off at Norfolk for major repairs. The crew reveled in the Christmas-like aroma of all the fresh wood embedded in the aircraft. I still have my souvenir piece of wood out of the wing. It was originally stained with red hydraulic fluid, but even though I kept it in a plastic bag, it's evaporated over the years. I get it. 100th of a second later on that pull-up, and we'd probably not have made it, but I wasn't thinking about that much at the time. The pace was all out. Airplanes were getting hit almost every night. I was not supposed to fly the next day because it was my turn to be the squadron duty officer. But my former pilot, Rob Graustein, and Bart Wade, his new right-seater, failed to return from a mission the following evening, and there was nobody else available. So I went up with Mike again that night. I was a little numb at that point, not so much from the trees, but because we lost another crew, and I knew Bob's wife and kids before we deployed. He was a good man. Anyway, by the end of the month, the parties were back at the negotiating table, and the air war was winding down. On January 8th, I flew my 162nd and last mission, and we headed back to Subic Bay. In mid-January, we steamed off around the Cape of Good Hope. A picture is Saratoga with people manning the rail as we pull out of Subic Bay. And headed back around the Cape of Good Hope and back to Oceania by mid-February. I spent 4 more months in the squadron helping rebuild the maintenance teams as a big fraction of the crew rotated out and we were replaced by new guys. In June, it was my turn, and I headed off to teach Navy ROTC at the University of Michigan.
Jerry, on behalf of everybody on this call, thank you. Thank you for sharing those stories and your service and your sacrifice. I know firsthand what it's like to lose those folks close to you. So thank you for sharing that with us. Again, I know that's a little bit emotional for you and quite the challenges to say the least. Why don't we shift gears a little bit, Jerry? You shared that you taught 3 ROTC graduating classes. Do you have maybe an ROTC story that you'd like to share with the audience? I may have shared with you, we have ROTC interns from all over the nation working with us right now.
Sure. I was assigned to teach the seniors. I did 1 semester of military law and another of naval leadership and management. But because I was the aviation representative, I interacted with all the classes. I was the only instructor who was single, and my apartment was just off campus and always open if my students wanted to talk about anything. So I had a great relationship with them and have kept in touch with several over the years. One year, the juniors wanted to prank Michigan State before the annual football game, and I agreed to drive the getaway car along with somebody who had a pickup truck in exchange for them not using permanent paint or doing any real damage. They barely pulled it off, largely because the campus police did a converging search instead of an expanding one, missing them by about 100 feet. I used this example in discussing any submarine warfare tactics later in the year. The next year, the now seniors wanted to try again, and I pointed out to them that the target would be alert and ready, and they decided not to do it. As they walked away, I heard one of them say to the other, "I told you if we asked him, he'd talk us out of it." They were a good bunch.
Hilarious. Every time I hear this story, I think I laugh even harder. Great memories, Jerry. Thank you. I think a lot of us as young midshipmen or young cadets remember similar stories. Very, very cool. Great memories for you, I'm sure. Jerry, why was command of the A3 Squadron, you talked about that quite a bit when we spent some time together. Why was that so rewarding for you?
I think the Navy does a very good job of matching responsibility with authority. When you have command in the Navy, you own the whole problem. There's no excuses ever. But with that responsibility comes the authority to carry out the mission. And I could get the best guys promoted and I could remove those who wouldn't measure up. And I sent a young sailor to the brig once to administer an attitude adjustment. And afterwards, I talked with him and kept a focus on his development. He went from the brig to being a career-minded petty officer. What I saw uniformly in Vietnam was that the senior guys led from the front. And I made it my goal to always be the example. We had a bunch of ancient, worn-out airplanes, but we got the job done, and it was the most satisfying experience.
Great leadership attributes, Jerry, to say the least. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. How has the military impacted you as a person when you look back, Jerry?
I think it taught me I could do more than I thought I could. Pre-mission anxiety needn't interfere with mission performance, and the only effective leadership derives from example.
Sounds like you're calm under pressure, to say the least, Jerry. That's for sure. As we get to know each other, where does that come from, and how did you develop this sense of calm under pressure?
I think the Naval Academy taught me to operate under stress by purposely stressing me and everybody else on numerous occasions. Sports also played an important role. I was on the varsity fencing team. Fencing is something like flying. You've got a lot of support around you, but when you're out on the strip, you're on your own. And it takes physical dexterity, but it also takes, reaction time and understanding what the other guy's doing and stuff like that. I found that I was sufficiently nervous walking out for a match that I could barely speak the words "ready, sir" to the umpire when saluting before the bout began. When he said fence, however, there are no nerves at all, just a focus on winning. I had the same experience in the fleet. Anybody who's not nervous before a combat mission is clueless, but when the catapult fires, there's no nerves, you just focus.
Well said. Thank you. Love that mentality, to say the least. Jerry, how does your military experience help you in your role today at the laboratory?
Well, my job is related to understanding foreign threats, and my naval service has given me, I think, a good sense for what is useful to the warfighter and what's not. In general, the leadership and organizational lessons from military service have been a substantive asset in putting together and managing project teams.
Okay, thank you. What type of adversity have you faced in your military career or in life in general, as if we haven't talked about any to this point, Jerry?
Honestly, while I found getting shot at every day to be unpleasant, I never thought of it as adversity. It's where I wanted to be. So I think that just sums it up.
Spoken in true Jerry fashion. Jerry, why is the lab a good place to work for veterans? What's your opinion on that?
I say there's two principal things. One is that, like the armed forces, it's mission focused and driven by national security needs. The culture is familiar and supportive in ways veterans can relate to. And as I think about it, that struck me when I got here, because I come from, doing graduate studies in an academic department where it's not a team. It's everyone for himself. It's a bunch of rival people, and who gets credit is a big deal. And I came here and it was, no, we're doing a mission. You helped, your name goes on it. The senior guys would drop everything to help teach me something about what I was doing. And I was really impressed with that. The second thing is that the lab supports reservists with liberal military leave for performing reserve duty, and often flexible scheduling to make it possible. And okay, I did a lot of reserve duty to be a commanding officer, so there's a few nights and weekends thrown in, but to fulfill reserves service expectations, you don't have to compromise your career here.
Those are great examples, Jerry. I don't know if everyone in the audience knows that we support, how much support we provide for our reservists and guard that work for the laboratory. Really, really great to hear you speak about how that impacted you and how you see that impact others. Jerry, shifting gears a little bit here, what do you like to do in your spare time?
Well, we've raised 4 kids, and I have no experience with this thing you call spare time. It's just the way it is.
Well said, my friend. Well said. So tell us a little bit about what's next.
Well, honestly, at my age, I don't buy green bananas. But I'm working on a couple of projects here that are both interesting and relevant to where we are in the world. On the home front, the 4 kids are grown and off on their own, so we have filled the space by becoming foster parents. Over the past year, we've cared for 2 very young babies with special needs, which has been all-consuming, but very much worth the effort.
Jerry, just shaking my head here. It's amazing, even though we've got to know each other much better over the last couple months, and it doesn't surprise me. Tell us a little bit more, if you're comfortable, about what the foster parent experience is like for you.
Well, Lynn and I went through a detailed background check and a lot of training on childcare focused on caring for kids with special needs. But it can't really prepare you for a no-notice arrival of a young baby. I'd say we quickly got reacquainted with our old friend sleep deprivation, but just as quickly got reacquainted with child development as they learn to recognize you with a smile and start exploring their world. I have to say that success is the hardest part. When the mother successfully makes it through rehab and treatment and passes some pretty rigorous sets of hurdles, then we pass care back to her. And that's a happy ending, but it's a very hard day for us.
It's humbling to hear it all over from you, Jerry. I want to thank you for sharing how personal that is. And I know I can speak for everyone in the audience that we have deep appreciation and respect for what you have done for those 2 special babies. So with that, it's time for our Q&A. So I am going to turn this over to Carrie, and Carrie is going to take over for the Q&A from any questions that we had on the chat. Carrie, over to you.
Thank you. First off, let me just say, Jerry, thank you for your service. And that was a lot of information for someone like me who doesn't really understand all that your experience entails, but it's very enlightening. And what an adventure you've had in your lifetime, it sounds like. So right now, we haven't had any questions come up in the chat. Hold on a second. It looks like some just came in here. Okay. One question from David DeAmico. Do you have any advice on balancing guard, reserve duty, working at the lab, and staying married?
Well, I think you need to be organized, and you need to know that there's limits, that, there sometimes if you can do it, you have to beg off in a requirement one place or another to keep everything in balance. but but I think that what would have been really tough for me was if the lab wasn't located near a naval air station. I mean, I think the challenge now that's much more than it was during the Cold War is that so many military institutions have closed, and long commutes to reserve duty are a real challenge. We were, as a squadron, we often did training flights to go pick up guys for the weekend because we could do that and it counted. But you know, Alameda's closed and all the and Moffett Field's closed, and it's got to be harder now than it was when I was doing it. Just to find you know, a billet that is a good fit for you in a reasonable commute from where you live.
Great, thank you.
Hey, Carrie,
So-
can I just add a comment that may help? I think it was David on that question, to add to what Jerry said. One of the things that has helped me, and I think has helped many of us, and I'm just going to be very transparent and honest in good Sean fashion, is being very open and honest with your spouse. And so for me, when those kind of situations came up, it was having that relationship to where my wife knew what was going on. She knew as much as she could in regards to sharing duties, sharing responsibilities, working at a in one occupation, yet serving at the same time. So for me, it often revolved around transparency, honesty, and trust in the relationship. So my kids understood, my wife understood, those who care most about you, right, who are with you. So I just wanted to add that. That's definitely something I've definitely experienced. I don't know if Charles, if you had anything to add before we turn it back over to Jerry.
Not at this time.
Okay.
So David did add, Jerry, that he flies out of Reno,
Ah,
and he thanked you for that response. So one person said they joined a little late, not sure if you mentioned it at all. And basically we did ask you what was the highlight of your military experience. And I know you said you couldn't pick just one, but she's actually asking, what's your favorite memory while serving in the military? Can you think of a favorite memory, something that stands out as being meaningful?
I'm rattling through a 10,000 item file here, and
Time.
I think that flying, you know, flying operationally in the fleet was such an exciting thing for somebody in their early 20s to do. And you know, one thing I remember from the Med is flying over Etna at night while it was erupting, flying over Etna inverted and looking down into the, you know, bubbling caldera. And you know, there's just not many jobs you can have that let you do that.
Right. So question for you, have you seen Maverick?
I haven't seen the second one. I went with some buddies to the first one and we laughed all the way through it. I suppose I'll get around to it when it ends up on Netflix.
There you go. So we have another question that came in. Jerry, is there anything you would have done different in your career if you could rewind time? He's also in the Navy Reserves. Or they are, I'm sorry.
Well, in some ways, I'd be afraid to change anything because I had enough close calls. I don't want to mess with history. But you know, I was so blessed with the billets I had and the people I worked with that I think it came out pretty much optimal.
Okay, that question was from Carlos Sanchez. Thank you for that question, Carlos. And the next question is from Inez Hines. What book did you publish, and can you talk about that a bit?
Oh, when I was the year I spent at Stanford, I wrote a book based on my thesis, and it titled Born Arming, which was a look at the way in which newly independent states went about their security business and the relationship between their defense activities and their economy and stuff like that. And it was, you know, there was no guarantee that, I mean, I was at Stanford, but the Stanford Press didn't need to pick it up. I mean, they liked it enough that they published it. And what it did is it gave me the option at the end of that, that time at Stanford. You know, I had to make a decision. I'd been at the lab 6 years at the end of it. And, you know, if I'm going to ever change and do something different, I need to make it now. And the book got me a job offer from MIT. And I thought about it for a couple of days and said, no, this is a better deal in academia. This is a more interesting place to work. And besides, it's February here, and it's a lot better here than it is in Cambridge. And so I stuck around.
Well, we are so glad you decided to stay. And Chad Giacomosi was asking, what was your Army versus Navy record while at Annapolis? He said that they went 4-0 against Navy from 92 to 96.
Yeah, well, we did a little better than that, but we were 1-2-1. 1-1, lost 2, and tied 1. That was back before there were tiebreakers in college football. But I remember the best prank. Okay, so you're gonna have to sit through the best prank. In the game in 65, 66, 65. There was a rumor spread that Lyndon Johnson, the president, would come to the game that year. And just before, after the march-ons, but just before the game started, a limo comes into the field, and it's got, 4 guys in trench coats walking beside it. And all the cadets stand up at attention, and they pull up outside in front of those, and the Navy goat gets out of the back of it, and they run across the field, and it was hysterical,
Sounds like it. And Ivan Sirio is asking, did you earn your shellback? And if so, what was the ceremony like?
Well, I'm a shellback because we crossed the equator heading southbound around the Cape of Good Hope. And I remember it as blowing all the water out of all the tie-down pad eyes on the ship, because that's what polywogs do. And they had old fire hoses cut up, and they're whaling you in the butt as you go. And you're covered with goop at the end. And we got hoisted up in a cargo net and hosed down with a saltwater fire hose. And but it was all worth it. I got my little thing. And when we came back the other way, we had some more polywogs on board, and I got to, administer the appropriate punishment.
That's great. So Mary Gillette asked, to the extent that you can discuss it, she'd be interested in hearing the highlight and what the most rewarding experience has been in your time working in Z program at the lab. Anything you could share?
Well, that I can share. That's a tough. There were times when I was, briefing one-on-one or with ambassadors and stuff, and saying it's this and this and not that, and they're going, okay, we're going to do something about it, and that was rewarding. I think. Okay, the best thing that happened to me at the lab was that I was privileged earlier in my career to work with a person who was doing the financial stuff. The terms were different there, but and who was incredibly sharp. And I was used to people saying, "Okay, you got to do this," and she would say, "Okay, I'll do it." And when it came to the finance, I was really impressed. And it didn't save me any money because we had to put a fortune in college costs and pay down a mortgage to hold all the kids. But, that was the best thing that happened to me.
So Brooke Yarrington, she's saying that her grandfather was an Air Force veteran, and she believes all veterans who have served are her personal heroes. Who would you say is your hero or biggest inspiration?
I served under some remarkable commanding officers, but the one who was both most astute and who was always in the front was my role model. Sadly, he didn't survive, but that's who I think about.
I'm sorry to hear that, Jerry. And that kind of goes along the lines of the next question from Brian Hernandez. He was asking if there was a particular superior, peer, or subordinate who influenced your time in service or even your career afterwards.
Can you say that again? I broke up. You broke up on part of it.
Sure, no problem. Brian Hernandez asked a similar question and wondering if there was a particular superior, peer, or subordinate who influenced your time in service or even in your career afterwards.
Well, let's see. I think in terms of the Navy, when I think about the Naval Reserve, there were people I worked with who did it right when nobody was looking, and that was I like that approach. And when I came here, the thing that got me was how everybody was mutually supportive. And when I was starting out, I hadn't had a chemistry course since I was an undergraduate, and there was we had some information that wasn't making a lot of sense. And they said, well, call Carlos Colmenares. Well, he was the dean of chemists here in the 70s and 80s. And he immediately gave me an hour of his time, went through everything. I mean, I was just so impressed with the collegial nature of this place that was, to me, an example I always wanted to follow. I want to be like that. I always want to be available for somebody.
That's great. And another question, have you ran into any of your military friends who also work at the lab?
Well, I mean, I know people at the lab who've worked in the Navy and or served in the Navy and other places like that. And we sometimes exchange sea stories. There's one guy that I worked with who I knew, he served under my command in the reserves, and he was a good guy, and he had applied for a job here, and I went and talked to the people hiring him, so you should hire that guy. It's one of those things where and he's been here for at least 25, 28 years now and doing fine. So it's a connection that matters.
Absolutely. And this is an interesting question. What is one piece of advice you wish you could tell your younger self?
I would say that that I would have tried to get maybe so that the time I spent at the State Department was really useful. And it probably would have been helpful, as long as I've been here, to have done another rotation at some point in DC, where you get to understand the sort of customer for what you're doing, and you get to explain to the customer base sort of what the physical limits of and things like that. It's been a good run. I don't have any complaints.
That's great. It appears to me that being in the military, you have to have thick skin. And so a few of your colleagues are razzing you in the chat, basically saying, hey, Chad is saying that his class stole the Navy goat. And he had that's 4 Army wins, by the way. And then also, Ivan said, "So glad you're not a pollywog." So that's kind of a fun thing. And then another final comment from Brian Hernandez is, "Thank you, sir. Having the integrity to help or do something, even when nobody else is around, is one of the best qualities a person can have." And it seems as if you have exemplified that. And that's the final question that's come through in the chat. And we have about 4 minutes time left. So Sean, Charles, Linda.
Carrie, thank you. Before I make my final closing remarks, I'd like to give Linda an opportunity to have any closing comments and then hand it over to Charles. Linda?
Yeah, thank you, Sean. I really enjoyed this session, Jerry. Thank you so much. Your service to the nation, the lab, and now to the region. I mean, it takes a very special couple to be foster parents for specials. It all just blows me away. I think if we could bottle your intensity and the crispness of your memories, we'd all be unstoppable. So I'll just say thank you for sharing today, and you've clearly inspired and entertained us all. So thank you, and thank you, Sean, for asking me to participate.
Thank you, Linda, for those closing comments. Charles, any closing comments before I close the session out?
Sure, Jerry, great presentation. You described flying combat missions over North Vietnam as stressful, and I think, like everyone, I was impressed with how calmly you described very harrowing circumstances. I think the word I would describe it as what you did is very dangerous, as evidenced by your friend being killed. Obviously, I'm sure you had friends who also ended up as POWs. So I think it's really important to emphasize that Jerry risked his life dozens of times on our behalf. And I thank you for that.
Thank you, Charles. I want to thank Linda. I want to thank Charles, Carrie, Renee, Michelle, our whole team, and most importantly, our guest of honor, Jerry, for sharing this valuable time with us. Jerry, for being a patriot, for serving our nation with distinction, for your contribution you make to our laboratory, and for being the person you are. It's truly been an honor for me the last month to spend intimate time with you and to get to know you as a human being, to really understand the impact you have made in so many people's lives, the character that you possess and the leader that you are. On behalf of all of us, thank you so much, sir, and thank you for the time with us.
Appreciate it.
Bye, everybody. Signing off here. Great job, Jerry. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, team.